The year is 1346. King Edward III of England has landed in Normandy with a force of about 15,000 men. This wasn't just any army, it was a hardened, well-organized force, full of veterans from the Scottish Wars, and probably the most effective fighting machine of its size in Europe. Their goal? To relieve pressure on English allies in Flanders and Brittany, and to demonstrate English power on French soil. After landing, Edward's campaign began with brutal efficiency. The English army marched inland, leaving a trail of destruction. Their most infamous act was the sack of Caen on July 27th. After facing stiff resistance, Edward initially ordered the entire population to be put to the sword. He later rescinded the order, but not before an estimated 3,000 townspeople perished in a 3-day rampage. This brutal event set a grim tone for the rest of the war. With the French King Philippe VI in hot pursuit, Edward's campaign turned into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Edward moved northeast, pillaging as he went, successfully drawing French forces away from other English-held territories. When he reached the River Seine, he hit a major obstacle. The French had destroyed all the bridges, hoping to trap the English army south of the river. Feeling the pressure, with Philippe's army closing in, Edward raced his troops upriver, desperately seeking a way across. Finally, at Poissy, just a stone's throw from Paris, they found a bridge that could be repaired. On August 16th, under the very nose of the French king, the entire English army slipped across the Seine and headed north, seeking the safety of Flanders. But their troubles were far from over. Philippe, now furious, gave chase. Edward reached the next major barrier, the River Somme, a day ahead of the French. Once again, he found his path blocked. All the bridges were either destroyed or heavily fortified. Edward's army, now running low on supplies, was trapped between the river and the advancing French. The situation was getting desperate. After failing to storm several fortified bridges, Edward's scouts delivered a sliver of hope. They learned of a tidal ford, known as Blanchetaque, that might be crossable at low tide. On the night of August 24th, Edward made a bold decision. He broke camp in the dead of night and force-marched his army towards the ford. When they arrived at dawn, their hearts must have sunk. The ford wasn't undefended. About 3,500 French soldiers under the command of Godemar du Foy were waiting for them on the opposite bank. With the main French army breathing down his neck and his supplies exhausted, Edward had no choice. He had to fight his way across. At 8 a.m., as the tide receded, the battle for the ford began. Edward ordered his legendary longbowmen to unleash a storm of arrows on the French defenders. Under this withering cover fire, a small force of English knights charged across the river. They fought tooth and nail to establish a small beachhead on the far bank. Seeing his chance, Edward poured more and more troops into the gap. The combination of the relentless arrow volleys and the determined English assault was too much for the French. They broke and fled. By 9:30 a.m., the entire English army was safely across the Somme. King Philippe had been so certain the English were trapped that he hadn't even bothered to clear the area of supplies. Edward's exhausted and hungry army was able to resupply by plundering the nearby towns. Now, safe on the north bank, with his army rested and resupplied, Edward decided he was done running. He chose his ground, a gentle slope near the village of Crecy, and prepared to face the full might of the French army. The stage was set for a battle that would change the course of European history. Edward divided his army into 3 battles or divisions. The front line consisted of 2 of these, made up of dismounted knights and men-at-arms, forming a solid wall of steel. His 16-year-old son, the future Black Prince, was in nominal command of the right, while the Earls of Arundel and Northampton held the left. Edward himself commanded the 3rd Division, a reserve held back several hundred yards. But the real key to his strategy was the longbowmen. He placed them in V-shaped formations between his main divisions, echeloned forward. This meant they could unleash devastating flanking fire, what's called enfilading fire, on any enemy advancing up the middle. To further secure his position, Edward ordered his men to dig small pits across the slope, creating a minefield of trip hazards for the famously powerful French cavalry. He even used a windmill as a command post to get a bird's-eye view of the battlefield. It's also rumored he may have had some early gunpowder cannons, but if they were there, their main impact was probably more psychological than physical. Meanwhile, the French army, commanded by King Philippe VI, was a massive force, estimated at anywhere between 30,000 and 60,000 men. This included 12,000 elite heavy cavalry, the pride of European nobility, and 6,000 professional Genoese crossbowmen. On August 26th, they arrived at Crécy late in the day, around 6 p.m. They were disorganized, tired from the march, and didn't bother to scout the English position. King Philippe, against the advice of his commanders, ordered an immediate attack. Just as the battle was about to begin, a sudden thunderstorm swept across the field, soaking the ground and making the uphill charge even more treacherous. It also, crucially, soaked the bowstrings of the Genoese crossbows. The French put their professional crossbowmen in the front line. They advanced to within about 150 yards of the English and fired, but their bolts fell short. As they tried to reload, a slow process that could take up to a minute, they were met with a storm of a different kind, a relentless hail of English arrows. You see, an English longbowman could fire an arrow every 5 seconds. The Genoese, who could fire maybe once or twice a minute, were utterly shattered before they could even get into effective range. What happened next was pure chaos. The French knights, arrogant and impatient, saw the mercenaries falter and decided to charge right through them. They thundered up the slippery, muddy slope, trampling their own infantry, straight into the killing zone of the English longbows. The sheer weight of their charge carried some of them to the English lines, leading to brutal hand-to-hand fighting. But the English line held firm. Time and time again, for a staggering 15 or 16 times throughout the night, the French knights regrouped and charged. And each time, they were met by the same blizzard of arrows. They were cut down in droves. By dawn, the slope was a horrific scene of death. The French had lost around 1,500 knights and nobles, and anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 infantry and crossbowmen. King Philippe himself was wounded and had to be led from the field. English losses, by contrast, were astonishingly light, perhaps only 200 men. Crecy was a thunderclap that shocked all of Europe. It proved that a well-disciplined army of infantry, armed with the devastating longbow, could decisively defeat a much larger force of elite heavy cavalry. This battle marked the beginning of the end for the mounted knights' dominance and reinstated infantry as the queen of the battlefield. After the battle, Edward marched on and captured the port of Calais, which would remain an English stronghold for over 200 years. Crecy didn't just win a battle, it forged England's military reputation and changed the very nature of warfare in the West.